Welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Pat McCormick, president of the City Club, and I'd like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today we will discuss improving our transportation system for the safety of all modes of transit, especially bicycles. But first I want to thank our partners and sponsors, as well as tell you about upcoming City Club events. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures that we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and our Friday Forum spring corporate sponsors, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, and Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt. We're grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. There's a lot going on with bicycles. Next week, June 5th, City Club will hold a town hall on the newly released bike report at the Green Dragon on the east side of town from 5:30 to 7 p.m. More information is available and reservations are available at pdxcityclub.org. And also, we should mention that Cyclopedia, a great art exhibit, is opening at the Portland Art Museum on June 8th. There's information about that on the back table there. You can take a look at it and be sure and join us for that. Also join us next week when Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici will talk about how to usher in a new generation of promise and prosperity when it comes to jobs and education. Prior to the forum will be the vote on the proposed bike report and recommendations. Doors will open at 11 a.m. and the program for the vote will begin at 11:30 a.m. After the Friday Forum program, online voting for members who are unable to attend the Friday Forum will be opened. The following Friday, June 14th, is our annual meeting, followed by a forum on the future of wave energy. Doors open at 10:45 and the annual meeting will begin at 11:15. Our forum will begin at the usual time. You can learn more about all City Club events, become a member, and purchase tickets on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting at this event. You can follow or mention us at pdxcityclub and be sure to use the hashtag CityClub on your tweets. We will be having a question and answer session with the panel at the end of today's program. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your questions. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards at the center of your table and write your questions on them during the forum. We will collect them prior to the start of the question and answer period. And now, our program. Portland is a city where people travel by car, public transit, walking, and bicycling. Each of those is here to stay. Biking is a part of the city's culture, and in 2012, Bicycling magazine ranked Portland as the most bike-friendly city in the country. With the release of City Club's report on bicycle transportation Wednesday, we wanted to bring together the following panelists to have a deeper conversation about bicycling. Kelly Clifton is an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering at Portland State University. Dr. Clifton conducts research and teaches courses in various aspects of transportation planning and policy, including travel behavior, land use and transportation, physical activity and health, and travel survey methods. She is a director of the Oregon Modeling Collaborative, a consortium of public and private agencies working to research, develop, and apply integrated transportation modeling approaches. Dan Kepler has chaired the City Club's Bicycle Transportation Research Committee for the past year. He is a partner in the law firm of Kennedy Watts, Arleno and Ricks, where he practices in the area of business litigation and professional liability. He's lived in Portland since 1992 and is a regular bike commuter. Jeff Mapes has covered politics in Oregon since Ronald Reagan was running for re-election. Yesterday, Jeff and his colleague Harry Esteve were recognized in the Washington Post as Oregon's top political reporters. He's a proud Westerner, but confesses he enjoyed a 4-year stint as a Washington correspondent. Jeff is the senior political reporter at The Oregonian and author of Mapes on Politics, a daily political blog on OregonLive.com. He's also author of a relevant book, Pedaling Revolution: How Cyclists Are Changing American Cities. Sharon Maxwell is a small business owner of a general contracting firm, Bratton Construction, Boanerges. Sharon is a native and longtime resident of Northeast Portland for 48 years. Sharon believes in community and keeping community connected and involved. She advocated for safe, livable communities and for a community that is inclusive to its citizens in the processes that happen in planning a livable community. Rob Sadowski joined the Bicycle Transportation Alliance as Executive Director in June 2010. Previously, Rob served as Executive Director of the Active Transportation Alliance in Chicago, Illinois, for 6 years from 2004 to 2010. He has over 20 years of nonprofit advocacy and management experience working on issues of affordable housing, community economic development, and transportation policy. And without further ado, please help me welcome the speakers to our stage today and begin our program.
Okay, I think I get to play traffic cop. As you know, I'm Jeff Mapes from the Oregonian, and it's really quite a privilege to be up here. And this is really a magnificent week to have this presentation. Urban bicycling is getting national and even international attention with the launch of the Bike Share program in New York City. All of a sudden, you've put another 10,000 bikes out on the street of New York City, and it's going to be fascinating to see how all that works out. Chicago is going to follow a couple weeks past that. And I got to tell you, this is an area where we're sort of in rapid fashion seeing an amazing amount of social change. I started working on my book back in 2005. And when I would tell people I was talking about, the urban bike movement, how it's changing cities, I got a lot of blank stares, including right here in Portland, and I don't think that would be the case now. It's really been a remarkable change to see as I travel around the country. I see more and more bike lanes everywhere. I was in Los Angeles last month, saw a protected bike lane, green painted line right out in front of City Hall. You know, here's the city where I always think of as the birth of America's automobile culture, and you're seeing some signs of change there. They had an event that I wrote in on that Sunday that I was down there called Cyclavia. It's like our Sunday parkways, and they had 150,000 people, they estimated, out riding just for the pleasure of riding down Venice Boulevard, which I got to tell you, scenically speaking, is no great shakes. Just for the pleasure of riding down that street without any automotive traffic on it. And so I spent, frankly, the Sunday in congestion as if I was on the freeway, except I was on the bike, stop and go riding. So that was pretty interesting. So without any further ado, I'll let the others give a little opening comment, and then we'll move on to questions.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Kepler, and I spent the last year chairing the Bicycle Transportation Research Committee for the City Club. And I just want to real quickly thank the other volunteers of the City Club Bike Research Committee who met weekly for an entire year and researched tirelessly to draft the report that I'm holding here. I'm hoping to refer to it if I get stuck here. And I also want to thank the other speakers who are before you, all of whom were interviewed by our committee and all of whom were very influential in the production of this report. I've also been asked to kind of give an overview of the report, and I have 2 minutes, so I've got a prepared speech, and here it is. The name of the report is No Turning Back. Bicycling in Portland is no longer in the realm of subculture. It has become an integral part of how Portland residents get around, and that's a good thing, not only for people on bikes, but also for transportation generally and for the livability of our neighborhoods. Although Portland has made measurable progress in expanding its bicycle network and in increasing ridership, bicycling still needs to be fully integrated into the city's transportation system in ways that optimize choice, emphasize connectivity, enhance efficiency, and especially promote safety. We need a city where anyone can feel safe riding a bike. The creation of safe and low-stress bicycle infrastructure needs to move from an opportunistic approach to a strategic approach. Transportation planning and funding must take into consideration all modes: bikes, cars, pedestrians, and transit. Planning for one mode at a time doesn't work. Also, it is critical to the planning process that the city accurately identify stakeholders and carefully consider their input in transportation planning. While there are many obstacles to overcome and many issues to consider, bicycling offers an inexpensive, healthy, and pollution-free transportation choice that, when properly implemented, will serve Portland well for generations. I encourage everyone to read the report available on the City Club website. It's only 80 pages long. But I'd point out that the executive summary is only 4 pages long, and if you've got your reading glasses, you can read it on this little blue sheet. So I thank you, everybody, for coming today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sharon Maxwell. I'm a small business owner and a longtime resident of Northeast Portland. And I would like to think that I'm here today is because I love my city and I love my community. I really feel passionate about this whole safety corridor and bicycle issue is because pedestrians, I think the study should be renamed Pedestrians and Bicycle Safety, making sure that the pedestrians are put first. And so I really feel like there needs to be more citizen input, community input around this whole issue, not new people coming into the community with great ideas, but asking the existing residents what they'd like to see. I can just remember as a kid, that was one of our favorite pastimes, that we would all get on our bikes and we would roll down those alleys and those streets and before congestion in our city took over. And so bicycling is not new to minority community or the Northeast community because recreationally we enjoy bicycles. But I think there are some cultural differences. And as a small business owner, in order for me to conduct my business, bicycling is not conducive for me to be able to transport going back and forth across the city. And so I just think the business community, existing residents, our seniors, and children. We need to make sure that we keep our children who are walking to school on a daily basis right there in the neighborhood. As a child, I can remember walking to school and getting hit by a car, and that was at the corner of Alberta and Gattenbine. So there's a lot more discussion that needs to happen, and the community needs to be at the table, and I'm glad that I'm here today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Clifton. I'm an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering at Portland State, and I do research on bicycling, walking, all modes of transportation. And it was really nice to be a part of this process, and it's really nice to be doing this kind of work here in Portland because I think that the leaders and the citizens ask really good questions, and we don't always have good answers. And I think one of the nice things is that Portland State tries very hard to engage with these kinds of difficult questions. So in my participation with the committee and my interviews with the committee, they asked me, I think, more questions that I didn't know the answer to than I did know the answer to. And I think that just means that we're asking very pointed questions about where the city should grow and how it should grow and what are the right transportation options. So I think the report's a great first step, and I think Portland, like other cities in the United States, are all struggling to think about where bicycling fits in. And anyway, I'm interested in seeing where this goes and participating in the conversation.
I'm Rob Sadowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Bicycle Transportation Alliance. And I just want to congratulate the committee for the hard work. The report is excellent. The report really captures a broad perspective of where bicycling is in Portland, and the next step is where bicycling fits within land use and where it fits within the region. We can't look at transportation as just a Portland-centric issue. It's a regional transportation issue and how people get around. In some ways, it's less about bicycling, but about how our communities look and feel and experiences, and I think that's where a lot of the cultural challenges and both stresses and opportunities lie that we heard earlier. Our goals at the Bicycle Transportation Alliance align very closely to this report, so that's partly why we're excited. Safety is very important to us as people experience the roads, and we know we can do better, and we can talk more as we get into the next stage of this conversation about ways that we can do better for safety. And I'm sure we'll be spending some time talking about utility fees and taxes, and we'll get there in terms of the response, both in the way the report is. It was great that the report said we should be going beyond the bus versus them, the bikes versus car, because it is integrated into us. But unfortunately, I've been spending the entire week after the report came out talking about one thing, and that's been really us versus them. And the report helped instigate that in that conversation. So hopefully today we can have a conversation about how we move beyond that so that we're working in partnerships. And the way the BTA considers these partnerships is in line very much with the report, partnering with freight, partnering with community, engaging, listening, and having an opportunity to start that dialogue. And finally, we're calling on reforming driver's education to become mobility education, so we're educating all users at the time of driver's education and testing for that, and I'd love an opportunity to talk more about that.
Okay, now for some questions. Well, I can't help it. Being a journalist, I'm naturally attracted to the word tax, so we're going to have to deal with that first off. So I'll go right to the advocate. Rob, what do you think of their recommendation of a 4% excise tax on the sale of new bicycles?
Confused, happy, mixed, angry, all at the same time. We live in a state without a sales tax, and there's a great historic reason why we live in a state without a sales tax. And so this comes into the mix. Right now, Salem doesn't have the appetite for something like this, so how we're going to pass it is going to be one of those questions. I think the BTA would say, generally what we'd like to do is tax things we want to see less of and find ways to encourage those activities that we want to see more of. We want to see more bicycling so that we're not in a situation where if we continue at the rate we are now without taking any more bold steps for bicycling, we will see by 2035 1 million more cars on the road every day. That would be equivalent to 23 Powell Boulevards of cars driving every day. And I don't think we can sustain that. So we need to find ways to encourage more, and we're concerned that taxes may not get us there. On the other hand, we're open to the conversation. We'd love to find a way to look at a more balanced way of funding our transportation, whether it's through a street utility fee or some other mechanism, because it's not only a question for us, but all my friends out there that are driving Priuses or other electric vehicles like Volts are not paying, they're paying much less than what I am paying in many ways.
I think you've answered that question before. You had a little practice on that one. Kelly, one of the other recommendations of the report dealt with essentially trying to move cyclists off of major roadways onto low traffic streets, also the greater use of separated cycle tracks. What do you think of that recommendation?
I mean, I think we should be building a network that serves cyclists to the highest and best use, and it doesn't always mean moving it off of major corridors, but I do think it means building the kinds of low-volume, safe places for people to ride that's connected to where people want to be. So in general, I think these ideas of separated facilities are great. They encourage people to ride, they're safe, they're attractive. But I don't think it necessarily means that we want to create a completely separate facilities for different modes. We don't want to segregate modes. So in general, I support the recommendation, but we just have to think carefully and take a systems-based approach and think about how all these modes are going to interact and what serves mobility needs the most.
Okay. Sharon, the report also called for essentially revamping the city's bicycle advisory committee that traditionally has been mostly made up of pretty avid cyclists. What do you think about that?
I am so totally in agreement with that. Yes. Yes, there needs to be more citizen involvement from the communities of color. I think youth need to be involved in that committee as well. And I'm sure there will be many people welcome and open to that.
Okay, and Dan, for
Jeff,
you.
can I respond to
Sure.
that too? I'm a member of the committee, and I think many people on the committee would wholly agree with that. And we also want to point out that it calls for representation from other modes like freight and pedestrian into that. We've had some interesting conversation that hasn't gone to fruition of saying, why do we have three committees? Why do we have a freight, pedestrian, and bicycle committee? That's what we're not. We should be beyond that. We should be talking about a multimodal approach. And how do you make sure that there's citizen engagement on freight planning, pedestrian planning, and regular road planning as well? Because we want to make sure that those are all integrated. All those are really great ideas, and we would welcome that. At least I would welcome that as a committee member.
So we're talking about a transportation advisory committee in essence. Yeah.
Sounds
Okay.
great.
All right. Dan, as somebody who's studied this for a year, and you know, Rob alluded to this, you can't get into this discussion without certainly hearing it from folks all around Portland. And so the question to you is, do we have a problem with the riding behavior of cyclists in Portland? If so, how do we improve it?
I mean, I think everybody can think of instances where a cyclist was riding unlawfully or was cutting somebody off, and everybody can probably think of instances where a driver was talking on a cell phone and driving unlawfully and dangerously. And I think it's just like Rob said, we've got to move off of the cars versus bikes debate, because that's not really what it's about. And to the extent there are safety concerns, our report deals with them in several ways. For one thing, you've heard the word integrated over and over up here already. Having an integrated system of transportation where bicycles and cars aren't put in each other's way in the system. Also, education, our report concludes that education and enforcement need to improve. So education includes things like the Safe Routes to School program, for which that's one of the things that we want to fund with the excise tax that you heard about, and also greater enforcement at dangerous points in the system for both bicyclists and for motorists. The other thing I think that Rob pointed out is just that the DMV manual has just sort of token explanation of, you know, issues with bicycle infrastructure, sort of token discussion of bicycle safety issues, and we think we agree with him that we need to, you know, revamp that so that there's more discussion explaining the new infrastructure that people are seeing on the roads, and just improving that education piece. Most bicyclists are also drivers. Every member of our committee was a driver, and so we think that that's a easy way to improve enforcement, and education.
Okay, I want to throw this one out to whoever wants to answer, and maybe more than one people will take a cut at this. I've had a fair amount of experience in European cities where cycling is a major mode of transportation, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, for example. And in addition to encouraging cycling in those cities, they do make it more difficult to travel by automobile. Part of it is, in a way, something we've already done in Portland, have relatively high parking rates downtown, but there's other strategies where we do as well. And I guess the question is, as we encourage cyclists, does that also mean in some fashion that we discourage automobile travel in this city, and particularly in the central core? Who wants to take a cut at that?
I'd like to jump in on that. What I've seen already with the changes that have gone on in the community, there's a lot of changes that have happened in the streets without drivers really being aware of it. And I know just driving through the local community, I've had to change my route because I didn't even realize that the changes that had happened had really been implemented. And so I really feel like it does change how vehicle traffic and how we're taking a look at that. And so it seems like there just needs to be more of a comprehensive planning before that goes into effect, because it does impact the whole community.
If we take two goals simultaneously side by side and not prioritize one over the other, one of those priorities is flow. We want traffic to flow. The second priority is safety. We don't want people to die. In the past, our transportation policies have focused on flow and not safety. So if we can equate them at least, and in my ideal it would be safety first and then flow second. We want to make sure that freight, for example, can get deliveries. They can get their product to the stores and shops that need to do that during their appropriate times and are not stuck in traffic. We want cars to move, we want bicycles to move, we want people to walk without anybody dying. That's our general goal. It's a lot easier said than done, but that's where we need to look at where are freight routes, where are arterial routes, how are they operating, speed limits. The slower we can get our residential streets, the safer it will be for a lot of folks. There was a great study done, I think by you, that looked at where you put a bunch of GPS devices on people and put them out on the street and you figured out where they went.
That was Jennifer Dill.
That was Jennifer. And it showed that people would go out of their way for a safer route on a bicycle. And it's probably the same, it's mostly the same case for pedestrians, but unfortunately not always. People will often not go even a half a block away to cross at a crosswalk because of convenience and speed, et cetera, or because there's a bus that they don't want to miss. And we want to create a system where people can make a mistake without dying. And that's going to require us to have a paradigm shift and rethink that. And it's not just infrastructure, it's education, it's enforcement, and it's behavioral change as early as possible.
I'd like to jump in a little bit there and just say, I'm not really sure how does the whole transportation plan work within the 20-minute walking communities, and so it seems like there's maybe a little bit of a contradiction, so I'd like to see what that looks like as well.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any, oh, go ahead.
And the answer is that you want to create opportunities for people to be able to walk, but you also want that traffic to flow. And that's how you create systems that both encourage driving at the right places and walking and biking and other forms in the other things. And that's kind of where Kelly was getting, is not every street needs a bike lane. Not every street needs to be a freight lane, but we need to think about it creatively as well as strategically. But one thing I want to get back to is I actually would disagree. I don't think $1.60 an hour is a very expensive parking rate.
Agreed.
All right, I want to give Kelly a chance to jump in on that if she had any follow-up on that. And also I wanted to ask her a little bit about what she sees as the major research gaps. What do we not yet know about bicycle transportation? When I was working on my book, I was struck by how many things that people didn't know. So
Yeah, well, there's an infinite amount we don't know. Rob just mentioned a few things, right? How do we balance the needs of multiple road users? And there's lots of examples that we can look to Europe for some great examples that work in their context. But at some point, we have to say, what do we want our city to look like? And then start from there. Let's define the problem or define the vision and then work backwards. So in terms of what I do, there's lots of great questions. All this infrastructure that we're building, the separated facilities that are being built not just here but other places in the country, it's creating different interactions with modes that we just frankly haven't seen before. So how do we create these safe systems where it's predictable, reliable, so that you know what to do, that you know how to interact? How do we deal with conflicts at intersections between pedestrians and cars and bikes? We know very little about how to predict demand. We don't know very much about how far people are bicycling. We don't have very good data. The kinds of data that we have at Portland State are pretty paltry compared to the behaviors that are out there. We don't understand necessarily what would entice people to become bicyclists or not become bicyclists. Bike-oriented or bike-supported development. We've done some work at Portland State to kind of suggest that the kinds of environments that support pedestrians are sort of the opposite kinds of land uses or environments that support cars, but that bicyclists don't fit into either of those paradigms. They tolerate lower densities like cars, but they want lower vehicular volumes and so on. So there's lots of opportunities. I think Rob also talked about it's not just the center city, but as we move out to other neighborhoods, more suburban, more auto-oriented neighborhoods, how can we make the bicycle fit and work there and integrate with other modes? And again, just this multimodal nature of our society and the kind of variation. How do you choose between biking one day and driving to the grocery store? You know, what are the key factors that people think about? So for me, it's a very fruitful and rich landscape. It's great to be a researcher because I have no shortage of things to think about.
And in fact, this is how we got her from Maryland, just so she can research these things. So there's one small example of economic development, and I wanted to expand on that a little bit and ask Dan whether he thinks the fact that we are the #1 bike city in the country gives us an economic advantage in any way.
I think it does in a lot of ways. For one thing, you know, we talk about bringing the creative class of people to Portland, young people, and it turns out that the creative class of young people really, really like this unique transportation system we have. They like the idea of being able to bicycle to work, and in fact, younger people are driving a lot less than the previous generation. So there's and employers, when deciding when to locate in Portland, look at what is the what employees are available here. And so we think this creative class of educated people that are coming to Portland helps the economy generally of the city. We also know from Kelly Clifton, or at least partly from Kelly Clifton's new study, that bicycling is good or at least neutral for small retailers in Portland. That that bicyclists are good spenders, and Roger Geller at Peabody has made the point that when people bicycle, they don't have to spend as much money on gas and on car repairs and that sort of thing, and they have money that they can spend on other things. So that's an important point economically for bicycling in Portland.
Anybody else have anything? Rob?
I think it's interesting that, specifically bicycling is putting in over $100 million in the economy each year in just Portland alone, let alone the region. But when we talk about the creative class, my guess is that there's some cringing in the middle of our table here, because the creative class is not benefiting African Americans, particularly African American men in this city, with an unemployment rate of 17%.
Thank you for mentioning that.
And I just recently went to Atlanta as part of the best practices tour with Randy Miller's team, and the same story, that the new jobs in Atlanta are not there for Atlantans who've been there for a while. And unless we start addressing how do we either integrate and find opportunities for people of color and communities of color to capture the opportunities of the creative class, or find alternative economic opportunities that can create new class of employees so that we don't have this dichotomy. So we have to be careful when we talk about it within that and understand that this can't be the only economic impetus for our city.
What I'd like to just say to that, though, is that we have a very large creative class here. The African American community, other communities of color want to participate, but a lot of times what I see is there's a lack of concern and indifference to patronize and be inclusive in the whole commerce and business setting. And so that's a deeper discussion that each person in this room and outside of this room needs to be open to and flexible to. So it's more to it than, that we need to go outside of Oregon. I know a lot of young college-age students who leave here because they don't feel welcome and invited into the circles. I mean, if you look around the room today, guess what? 1, 2, 3. So it's a deeper conversation. It's more about us, the community, embracing one another, because that's what we need to do. That's where we're going to see more of an economic development happen, is when we're all embraced equally.
Okay, I want to go into a couple lightning rounds here. I always wanted to say that, finally. So I'm going to ask everybody real quick. First off, bike share, I talked about it at the top. Is that a good thing for Portland? And give an example, if you can, of a trip that you would make on such a bike if it did come to Portland. I'll just go right down the road, starting with you, Dan.
Our committee didn't actually look at bike sharing, but so this is just my own personal view. But some of the car share programs that are coming up here are really working well, and I use them. And I probably would hop on a bike share bike and find a rubber band in my office to put on my pant leg and ride up to City Club from my office if it was available.
Sharon?
I would say the same. I know I'm going to give a plug here for Pedal Tours. We participated with them for the summer for our youth summer program, and it's you can go in and rent there. And so if there was a bicycle share, sure, for those who feel like that's what they want to do, great.
I have to say, when I lived in Maryland and DC started their bike share, I was a little skeptical. I didn't have a clear idea of the demand for that new service, and it's gone like gangbusters. And of course, Portland isn't DC. We have a different transportation system. We have a different economy. We have a different city. But I think there's lots of examples of where I could use a bike share in my daily life. If I took a bus to work and then have a meeting, I could hop on a bike share and go down to ODOT or go to Happy Hour, go to Metro, but then hop on transit to come home. So I think these are new opportunities to think about a flexible transportation system, bike share, car share, vehicle share, having more and more options and more flexibility than we've ever had before.
Well, I'm a true believer. The first minute I got on a bike share bike in Lyon, France, and experienced it, I was blown away. I thought, no, you need to have infrastructure in place, and realized it's not true. You just need some bikes around the city. And it creates this new trip. In fact, it creates new opportunities similar to streetcar where people are, oh, I'm going to jump on that. And if you get that first half hour free, like we used to have with free transit zones, now you've got this opportunity to just say, oh, I want to go to the Pearl, or I want to go to Mississippi, or I want to go down to Alberta, or wherever it is for that trip that might just be really impromptu. It is transforming cities, not just in Europe, but across the globe. Hangzhou, China, has 50,000 bikes operating every day. It is amazing what is happening. In order for it to be really successful here, we need enough bikes. And one of our struggles is because of resistance to putting enough capital dollars and governmental dollars into it, we're struggling to raise dollars on the sponsorship side. So if you're a business and you're interested in learning more, come see me or come see Alta Bike Share and find out more about what's going on. There are opportunities available, but if we can raise the stomach for additional government subsidies, I see this as transit more than I see this as free bikes. It's fabulous. Next time you're in DC or Minnesota or New York City or Chicago or soon to be Puget Sound or San Francisco, just try it. You will love it. And you won't need any rubber band for your pants because there's skirt guards on the bikes.
Good to know.
That would indeed be one of the reasons to use that I would use bike share during the day. Oftentimes now, if I'm going, say, over to the convention center, Pearl District, anywhere really within 3 or 4 miles for an interview or whatever, I'm apt to ride my bike, and the ability to just be able to hop on a bike without having to even cuff my leg or anything like that is great. My first experience on bike share was in Paris, actually, where a guy taught me how to ride around the Arc de Triomphe, which is a thrill not to be missed. But, probably most of you are, anybody who's been to Paris knows how chaotic the traffic is there. And Velib, which is the name of the bike share system, is a great example of how having the presence of thousands and thousands of bikes on the street changes motorist behavior, because you can actually do something like that, ride one of these heavy bikes around the Arc de Triomphe. It's quite interesting. Okay, and I'm getting off my lightning round here. The last question, I'm hoping we can get through this before the audience questions, is the city's master plan for bicycling calls for, I believe, 25% of trips by the year 2030 to be made by bike. And I'd like to ask each of our panelists what they think is a realistic goal for mode share for cycling in the city. We'll start at the other end of this time with Rob.
I think 25% is realistic. We've seen similar bumps in European cities in the same period of time. We're getting closer and closer to 10%. I'd like to see a 10% interim goal by the year 2018, and so that we can set our sights really quick. But if we do not take these steps to get to 25%, again, imagine 1 million more car trips in front of you. Imagine another a need in order to handle that capacity of arterial streets of another 23 Powell Boulevards.
I think it's realistic, but it depends. I mean, if we're willing to make the commitment to make the kinds of investments, then absolutely it's realistic. But it's a choice we make. It's not predetermined.
Well, in your mind, what kind of improvements, or investments rather, do we need to make to get to that kind of mode share?
I think we need a connected network that connects the entire region, not just the city of Portland. It needs to connect all neighborhoods. We need to have good north-south corridors. We need to have more separated facilities that encourage sort of those next couple cohorts of people who are interested but concerned to take up cycling.
Sharon?
You know, that just seems really like a big number because we still don't have everyone at the table. And so I just think it still needs to be a lot more discussion on what that really looks like.
And Dan?
I think our report concludes that it's a very ambitious goal, and our report also concludes that we need to get everybody at the table. But I think we agree with Kelly Clifton that if the infrastructure is there, people will use it. There's really, really solid studies that's the case. I think there's other factors that could influence, like the price of gasoline. But it's an ambitious goal, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try for it.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I did want to get in here because I think it is an important issue when we're talking about multimodal and we're putting so much investment in mass transit. What can we do better to better integrate cycling with mass transit in this city? Anybody want to take a crack at that one? Rob?
In many ways, we're doing a good job. TriMet has been very open from to figuring out a way not just to provide access on the buses and on the rail itself. Bike share is going to make a big difference because we hope to see less bikes inside the system because you wouldn't need to bring your bike all throughout the whole trip. You'll be chaining those trips a little bit more, so it'll be a more pleasant experience. You won't have to bring it all the way. Assuming we can get bike share systems into the suburbs as well, that will be really important. So number one is we need to, even though we haven't even started it yet, start thinking now about expanding bike share, particularly to key transit centers in the region. Number two, I think we have an opportunity with the Southwest Corridor and the long-term revisioning of Barber to think about integrating bicycle and transit into that in a way that is really exciting, really bold, and really helps build for a future vision for other similar corridors.
Sharon? Go ahead.
So I have a suspicion that cycling and transit are often substitutes. That we have a lot of fair weather cyclists who take transit when the weather's not so great, and then they drag out their bike when the weather's great. But I think we also need to think about those transit riders who don't have their other alternatives. And so thinking about cycling as a way to working with that community to increase what transit offers them. So I think that's another piece. I think a lot of times when we talk about cycling and transit, we are talking about these choice riders. And so I think this complements probably what Sharon might be talking about.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that TriMet's doing a great job to combine with bicycling and the transit system. It seems like it's a natural thing. But I feel like people have their own choices of how they want to commute. And because there's a difference in how everyone wants to present themselves when they get to that next place. And so bicycling for communities of color today, to come to a meeting like this and to wear what I have on, that would not be my choice, and in an everyday situation, it's not convenient. And so I just think that with the transit, bicycling, yes, good, but there's just a more deeper conversation of how everyone wants to be able to commute and what they feel is safe and best for them.
Oh, go ahead, Dan. Sure.
Choice is a major part of our report, optimizing choice for people. one of the things we heard from TriMet and from a lot of people who were interviewed by our committee is that one of the toughest things with transit is what they call the first and last mile problem, which is the distance to the MAX station from your house. And bicycling can really help with that, we think, but it's not always easy or good to put the bicycle on the bus or on the MAX because it's hard to cram a whole bunch of those on there. So we think that one of the things that TriMet could do is have more safe bicycle parking at major stations, sort of like Park and Ride, and that approach may solve some of the last and first mile problems.
Okay, I think we're ready for audience questions. Am I correct that we first have a question from a designated?
Yes, they are.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Moorhead. I'm on the Board of Governors. I'm the board host today. I would like to, first of all, before I ask my question, remind everyone that, as you know, City Club is instituting online voting, electronic voting, for members who can't come to the meetings and vote. And yes, next Friday, we are going to be voting on the bike transportation report. So if you come to the Friday Forum meeting and you're a member of City Club, you will be able to vote on that report. But for everybody here and everybody who's listening, and all City Club members, if you can't get to the meeting next Friday, after next Friday's vote here at the Friday Forum, where everybody can vote in person, then the vote will be open online in the afternoon and through the weekend. So if you don't come to the Friday Forum next week, you will get an email with the link to the voting site. And we are delighted that City Club is instituting this new form of voting. We're doubling and tripling the number of people who are voting now on the research reports, and this simply allows many more members of City Club to participate in setting the policy of City Clubs based on our research. So I do want to ask Dan a question, and other members of the panel can join in on this if you want to. Yesterday, Steve Dean wrote an article on the bike transportation report. And Dan, I know you were interviewed for that article. Your name was in the article, and I don't understand what Steve Dean's saying. I have to say, I really don't get his point. But I think it's a somewhat critical article. I'm not sure what it is. And so my question to you, Dan, and anybody else who wants to join in on this, can you tell me if you know what Steve Dean's point is and how you would respond?
I have no idea. But Mr. Dean is not here to defend himself, but he was very nice on the phone, and I appreciated his professionalism. The only thing I can think of is it looked like he kind of bullet pointed a lot of the caveats in the report and ignored the bullet points of the report. But I'm not sure where he was going with that. I'm pleased that the leading bike blogger, Jonathan Moss, really had a very nice write-up of the report in bikeportland.org that really highlighted the conclusions and then had a nice follow-up on the controversial tax issue. So I don't know what Steve Dean was talking about, but if anybody understood it, let me know.
I'll take a pass, but apparently Rob wants to speak on this.
I think he was trying to show that in presuming what people might be concerned by, the report goes out of its way to address the problems. And so, for example, whether it's taxes or whether it's the presuming that bicyclists are scofflaws and all breaking rules, there was some kind of dichotomy in the report that almost seemed contradictory. On the other hand, I'm not sure how you could have written the report without addressing those issues.
Okay, next.
Hi, Sue Shattuck, City Club member. When boats go out into the water, maritime law, basically, things are run by rights of tonnage. And so I would wonder from each of the panelists what their mindset they would want for everyone who leaves their house to go somewhere, whether it's on their feet, a bike, car, mass transit. You know, what would they like to have everyone think about that would sort of mitigate the us versus them mentality that's out there?
Kelly, well, you're the researcher.
Well, I think, at least in the research, I have some brand new numbers on some data we collected from a follow-up to the spending study that we've done that shows that the variations in people's modes. So I think Dan brought this point up earlier that, you know, cyclists are often drivers, pedestrians are often drivers, drivers are often bicyclists, and so forth. So I think that's just the first thing, is that, you know, we're all road users. Second thing is we just need to always yield to the most vulnerable. So if you're the, you know, the right of way goes to the most vulnerable road user. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but.
I would just say, in regards to that, is we would want to think about wellness and healthy choices, and whatever that is for wherever you're at and whatever season you're in, that you can make that choice.
And you know, the topic of our report was the focus and the charge was about bicycling, but it could have been a report about bicycling and pedestrian transportation. And Sharon made an excellent point earlier, which is that, you know, these active transportation modes need to be both more integrated into the whole transportation system.
And if you look at what happened on the bridge on I-5, we need a new transportation funding system. And one of the lessons from what you just mentioned in terms of boats is how do we appropriately charge for the appropriate usage, whether it's weight, wear and tear on roads, time, et cetera, so that everybody's paying their fair share. And us at Bicycle Transportation Alliance would relish the ability to have a real honest, forthright conversation about that.
Okay, next.
Chris Smith, club member. I'd like to congratulate the committee and the club on a great report. There's a saying that you can tell the pioneers, they're the ones with the arrows in their backs. And the part of the report made me think about that. It called out how confusing the new traffic control markings devices are for some transportation system users. You know, we are the pioneering major metro in the United States, and we're adapting traffic control from Europe, trying to make it work here in the interest of safety. Yet at the same time, if the very newness of that is causing a safety issue, how do we be that pioneer but do it in an effective and safe way?
It seems like to me that with the whole new transportation multimodal system, is that we need to go back to the education of what that looks like for everybody. We're in the 21st century now, but you know, we've dropped the ball in so many different arenas, and right now transportation is a big one and what we're talking about today. And so I feel like we need to go back to re-educating ourselves on what this new transportation system really looks like.
Well, and I think also these are new to everyone. So, you know, I appreciate the fact that Portland's always willing to partner with the university to help us understand how effective, you know, what is the right way to do this that's the most intelligible for all the road users, the safest, and so on. So.
When it's put in place, it should make sense without any signs, without any rules. I think in some cases, in most cases, the city is doing a really good job, particularly for us as bicyclists. But if I'm a pedestrian advocate, and in my heart I'm a pedestrian advocate, I'm freaking out right now because there's too many people dying on the street when they're walking.
And in fact, sort of following up on that, there's a written question that I think directly goes to what Rob said, talking about how do you improve education. DMV manual is good, but people don't never look at it after they take the test. And you alluded earlier to talking about improving education. What do you think?
So our vision is rather than getting a driver's license, you get a mobility license. The mobility license would show that you're proficient at not just driving a car, but bicycling, walking, and transit planning. One of our problems, though, is we have a state that doesn't have a required driver's education system. So we need to also be thinking about how are we delivering driver's education to whom and what age. So it's very complicated in the state of Oregon. but I think we can move that. So BTA is piloting the concept of mobility education. We're looking for funding to pilot it both in a suburban school and an urban school to see whether there's different lessons and different curriculum is needed for both of those. But we think there's a lot of possibility in this new concept. The earlier we get folks, the more it's retained. In some cases, there's an argument if you wait till you're 25, there's not a lot of change that's going to happen.
And I would just say that's why the Safe Routes to School program that's mentioned in our report is just so important to have young people learn about bicycle safety from an early age, and probably also pedestrian safety as well.
The Safe Routes to School
Yes.
is teaching both. We teach Safe Routes to School, pedestrian safety in 2nd grade, and bicycle safety in middle school, 4th through 7th grade. 12 years ago, 8% of Portland Public School students were walking and biking to school. Today, it's more than 42%.
All right. Let's see if we can get a couple more questions in.
Hi, Cassandra Griffin, City Club member. I'm going to return to the controversial tax issue and direct this question to Dan. You acknowledged early on in your opening remarks that everybody who bicycles brings a benefit to society overall. They reduce pollution, they reduce wear and tear on the roads, they reduce the need to create bigger roads. So why did the group propose that cyclists be singled out to pay for that benefit they provide?
Well, my first comment is that I learned this week that nobody likes taxes. But it turns out everybody likes revenue, and our committee was charged with really trying to examine viable revenue sources. And the big priority of our committee, as I've just said, is educational programs like the Safe Routes to School program. And it turns out that programs like that are no longer receiving at least dedicated funding from the federal government. And it would have been easy for our committee to just say, let's look to the federal government for this funding, but we think that like the Safe Routes to School program and also research programs like the bike counter that's permanently installed on the Hawthorne Bridge needed a revenue stream that they could depend on, and where we wouldn't have to go to Congress and ask Congress to give us money for that. And so while we recognize that all transportation is heavily subsidized and that bicycles, as the questioner has said, contribute in a positive way, we think this was a targeted and limited tax proposal that could help, actually help the cycling community a lot. It was proposed in a report to the governor last year. It's been proposed in other reports, and the cycling community hasn't been too terribly against it. But we think the emphasis on safety justified, $20 on a $500 bike.
All right, let's try to get one more question in.
Steve Crouch, City Club member. Having been a bicycle commuter for a number of years, I have some thoughts about the bike routes. I think the best idea for a bike route is a 12-foot outside travel lane on arterial streets. There's room enough for a bicycle and a car side by side, and the cars keep it clean when the bike's not there. And regarding the funding for this sort of thing, there's a common misconception that the gas tax pays for roads. It does not. That comes out of the general fund. Thank you.
Okay, I guess there wasn't a question in there.
If there are no further questions, excuse me, we've run out of time for our broadcast today. I was bike number 2123 coming across the Hawthorne Bridge to the meeting today. I hope that you'll join us next week when we have a vote on this bicycle transportation report. The Friday Forum speaker next week will be Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici. As we close for today, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to Kelly Clifton, Dan Kepler, Jeff Mapes, Sharon Maxwell Hendricks, and Rob Sadowski for our panel. We appreciate your help in getting us through the understanding that we need to be able to vote next week on the bicycle transportation report. We are adjourned.